Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really critical phase of the PMI-RMP certification course. We are demystifying Domain 2, which is all about risk identification. So, let's put on our investigator hats for a second. Think of yourself as a detective, because honestly, that's exactly what risk identification is. We're exploring that crucial bridge between your project's initial planning and the deep dive quantitative analysis that happens later. This is where we literally go out into the field, gather evidence, uncover those hidden traps, and, spot the golden opportunities that could totally define whether our project sinks or swims.
Right off the bat, we need to talk about the stakes here. Domain I accounts for exactly 23% of your total exam score. Just think about that. Nearly a quarter of your entire PMI-RMP exam rests on how well you master these identification techniques. It is an absolutely massive chunk of the syllabus. And that number alone tells you just how highly the Project Management Institute values the proactive, systematic discovery of risks before they even happen. Because let's face it, if you can't identify the risks, you simply can't manage them.
So to build our official case file today, we are going to investigate the 4 specific tasks that make up this domain: identification exercises, assumptions and constraints, triggers and thresholds, and finally, the risk register. Let's get right into it. Now, keep in mind, this detective work isn't just for your traditional waterfall projects. We're identifying threats and opportunities across all methodologies. The official exam outline makes it super clear that today's risk practitioners operate in a huge variety of environments. Whether your team relies on a strict predictive approach, runs fast 2-week agile sprints, or navigates some kind of hybrid model, your job to actively hunt down and log risks, that remains exactly the same. The environment might shift, but the detective work never stops. Okay, looking at task 1. Gathering our very first pieces of evidence isn't just about sitting alone in a room and guessing what could go wrong. Actually, scratch that. It's the exact opposite. The official syllabus defines this as a highly collaborative, data-driven process. We're talking about drawing information out of the people who know the project best. You'll be conducting meetings, interviews, focus groups, and really leaning into subject matter expert support activities. You're analyzing audio transcripts and digging into telemetry data to spot deviations in performance metrics. And here is a really key takeaway. In PMI's framework, risks are not always villains. Sometimes they're allies. You are actively hunting for opportunities to exploit just as aggressively as you're hunting for threats to avoid.
Which brings us to a bit of a narrative cliffhanger. What happens if the very foundation of your project timeline is flawed from the start? Every single project out there is built on a bed of assumptions and bounded by constraints. We assume vendors will deliver on time, right? We assume the budget is stable. But what if those underlying foundational beliefs are actually just masking your biggest project risks?
That leads us perfectly into task 2, examining assumption and constraint analyses. This is where we really interrogate the boundaries of our project to see how they might impact our investigation.
You have to explicitly categorize your assumptions, outline your hard constraints, and rigorously assess the risks attached to every single one of them. You can't take anything for granted. It's all about connecting the dots and predicting cascade effects. Think about it like a row of dominoes. Say you assume standard working hours, but then a major stakeholder holiday season hits. Suddenly approvals are delayed, which stalls development, which pushes back your entire launch date. Understanding how those relationships cascade is the absolute hallmark of a true risk management professional.
Moving on to task 3. Once we've got our suspects and challenged our assumptions, we need a surveillance system. This task requires us to document the actual motives and warning signs of our suspects based on the environment. We have to establish our risk compliance thresholds alongside the triggers, causes, and timing.
A brilliant way to visualize this is using the cause-risk-effect meta-language. It provides a mental timeline for assessing these risks. It goes sequentially, like this. First, you have a root cause, the origin. That cause eventually creates a trigger, which is your early warning sign. When that tripwire is crossed, the actual risk event happens. And finally, that event leaves an effect, an actual impact on your project's objectives. Getting super comfortable with this specific timeline structure is going to be incredibly helpful for organizing your thoughts on the exam.
But listen, you are not doing this in a vacuum. As the risk champion, you can't just be a passive observer. You must actively empower your stakeholders to challenge those compliance thresholds. Project environments shift constantly. A warning threshold that made total sense in month 1 might be dangerously outdated by month 6. You really want to foster a culture where your team feels totally confident raising their hand and saying, hey, I think our warning threshold for this technical risk is set way too high. And finally, the whole shebang culminates in Task 4, developing the risk register. This is the ultimate output of Domain 2. It is your official case file. Everything we've done up to this point, the interviews, the telemetry data, the cascade effects, the early warning triggers, it all gets documented right here.
But you aren't just making a simple list of names. Your risk register has to validate the evidence. You must examine vital attributes, like the probability of the risk, its potential impact, and its urgency. You've got to trace its origin. Is this an internal process issue or an external market force? And, for sure, you must strictly classify each entry as either a threat we need to mitigate or an opportunity we absolutely want to capture.
So, stepping back and looking at the big picture, you can really see how perfectly this 23% bridges the gap from our initial strategy in Domain I directly over to the risk analysis phase. We set the rules of the game, and now we've executed our identification exercises and populated the register. We've gathered the suspects and mapped out the warning signs.
I'm going to leave you with one final provocative thought. Now that you've identified all these suspects, how on earth will you quantify their potential impact? You've built an incredible risk register, but your work isn't over. How will you run the numbers, apply quantitative models, and prioritize these findings when we cross over into Domain 3? Well, that deep dive into risk analysis is a story for our next explainer. Keep that case file handy, and I'll catch you next time.